They looked at her and laughed. Just an older woman in a faded flight suit, quiet and unassuming, standing among a sea of fresh uniforms and louder voices. "Can she even fly anymore?" someone whispered. They called her Granny Flyboy and joked about booster seats and bifocals. But what they didn't know was that she'd already flown missions they couldn't pronounce, in aircraft they'd never heard of. They thought she was outdated. What she really was classified. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when you misjudge quiet power and learn too late that the sky still belongs to her. At 0700 sharp, the sun came down hard on Falcon Ridge Air Force Base. The tarmac shimmered like hot steel, and the air was thick with jet fuel and the scent of burned coffee. Pilots, mostly younger, swaggered toward Hangar 4, talking fast, loud, all chest and confidence. Among them, a single figure moved differently, slower, steadier, like the runway answered to her steps. She wore no insignia of rank, no flashy aviator sunglasses, just a crisp regulation uniform and boots, so worn they looked welded to her feet. Her name was Eleanor Briggs, and at 61, she was the oldest active-duty pilot on the base. Most folks had either retired or been pushed into desk jobs by that age, but Eleanor? She still passed every flight check, every medical exam, every tech training. She just didn't post about it. "Morning, Grandma Flyboy," someone snorted. The voice came from Captain Trent Lawson, the new squadron commander, young, polished, and more comfortable in front of a camera than a cockpit. His smirk landed like a slap across a crowded room. "Still remember which lever does what, or do we need to label it in large print?" Some of the younger crew chuckled awkward, unsure, but no one said a word. Eleanor didn't look up. She was kneeling beside an F-16, inspecting its landing gear with the calm precision of someone who'd done it in sandstorms, ice fields, and war zones. Then came Lieutenant Jamie Rowe, Trent's loyal sidekick 27, Instagram branded, and never without his phone. "Maybe we can get her a booster seat," he said with a forced laugh, already filming. Eleanor stood slowly. She didn't respond, didn't crack, just clipped her checklist to the clipboard and moved on like their words were background noise. But not everyone was so indifferent. A tech sergeant by the name of Cole shifted uncomfortably, glancing from Eleanor to the men, then down again. He'd seen what she could do in the air. Most of them had. But here, in the open, nobody wanted to be the one who spoke up. From the tower, Colonel Adrian Moss, Intel Director, watched it all unfold with unreadable eyes. She didn't move. Not yet. What happened next was orchestrated with the kind of quiet cruelty only bureaucracy knows how to perfect. That morning, Eleanor was called to the front of the squadron's briefing room. Captain Lawson stood there, flanked by Lieutenant Rowe, tablet in hand and a rehearsed tone in his voice. He started rattling off flight performance inconsistencies, fitness metrics concerns, and updated uniform protocol violations. Nobody bought it, but nobody interrupted either. Then, with a false air of regret, Lawson delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, Colonel Eleanor Briggs is grounded until further notice, pending a full review. For regulation compliance, you'll need to remove all identifying patches and flight credentials now. Gasps never came, just a heavy silence. Eleanor didn't blink. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Her hands reached for her name tag. The sound of Velcro peeling echoed like thunder in a chapel. Then came the squadron patch, the American flag, the silver wings she'd worn since her 20s. Each one removed with care, folded neatly, placed on the metal table beside her. No dramatics, no shaking hands, just grace and precision like she was still in charge. Lieutenant Rowe's camera was rolling. His smile faltered for a second, just a flicker, but it was there. Eleanor looked out across the room, not at Trent, not at Jamie, but at the faces, each one, like she was memorizing them, like she was making sure they would remember this moment. "If this is what leadership looks like to you," she said softly, "wear it well." Then she turned and walked out. No salute, no tears, no anger. Just a pair of dusty boots echoing down a hangar hallway, leaving behind a room that suddenly felt too small, too young, and far too quiet. Nobody followed her, but nobody forgot. The diner sat on the edge of town, wedged between an old auto shop and a bait store that hadn't changed its sign since the Reagan administration. Inside, the lights buzzed softly overhead, and the coffee tasted like it had been brewed during the Cold War. That's where Eleanor Briggs went after walking off base. She didn't go home, didn't make a scene, just slid into the back booth like she had a reservation with the silence. Moments later, the bell above the door chimed. In walked Colonel Adrian Moss, her hair pulled tight, uniform sharp as ever. She didn't sit right away. Just stood there, studying Eleanor like someone trying to read a coded message written in stone. "You okay?" Adrian finally asked. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She poured a packet of sugar into her coffee, stirred slowly, and said, "I've seen worse." Adrian leaned in, lowering her voice. "You planning to let that stand?" Eleanor didn't blink. Sometimes it's better to let them think they've won. Gives you room to move. That was Eleanor, always 5 steps ahead, even when she looked like she wasn't moving at all. Adrian tilted her head. "So, you're moving?" Eleanor didn't say a word. She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside, a time, a location, and nothing else. Adrian opened it, read the note, and raised one eyebrow. "Thursday?" Eleanor nodded. "Make sure the cameras are working. Every single one." They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Some friendships, especially the kind forged 30,000 feet in the air under hostile fire, don't require a lot of words. When Eleanor left the diner, the wind had picked up. A thin layer of dust swirled around her boots as she walked back to her truck. She didn't look back, because she didn't have to. Over the next couple days, the base moved on or tried to. Captain Trent Lawson strutted through the hangars, louder than usual, flashing his grin like it was regulation. Lieutenant Rowe posted filtered photos from the flight line, talking about streamlining performance and next-gen air strategy. Most folks smiled and nodded. But something had shifted. The silence Eleanor left behind had a weight to it. Conversations were shorter, glances lingered longer, and more than a few of the younger techs started asking questions not out loud, but with their eyes. No one had seen her since that morning. Until Thursday. It started with an unusual order from General Beverly Sloan, the base's regional commander, a direct mandate that all squadron personnel report to Hangar 9 at 0800 for a classified demo. Nobody knew what it was about. Not even Trent. And that bothered him more than anything. "Must be a waste of time," he muttered to Jamie Rowe as they stood near the front. "Bet it's just a vendor pitch or some dull flight data rollout." Jamie was too busy adjusting his phone camera to answer. He wanted good footage for transparency, of course. But then the sound came. Low at first, then rising, but not like any fighter jet they knew. People turned toward the western ridge. A shadow cut through the morning, sun-sleek, angular, and fast enough to make jaws drop. The aircraft screamed across the horizon, dipped low, then pulled into a vertical spiral that seemed to defy physics. It wasn't just fast. It was impossible. The jet hovered mid-air, then twisted into a tight corkscrew before dropping low and skimming just feet above the tarmac. Silence followed. Everyone stood frozen, eyes locked on the strange black shape now easing down like a whisper. When the canopy lifted, it was as if time paused. Out stepped a figure. She pulled off her helmet. Silver hair shimmered under the morning sun. It was Eleanor. No insignia, no uniform, just her flight suit, and the kind of presence that made grown men forget how to speak. She stepped down from the aircraft like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she had. Not one person said a word. Even Trent's mouth hung open, locked somewhere between disbelief and dread. She walked toward the crowd, not fast, not dramatic, just steady. Every footstep seemed to carry more authority than any rank ever could. And suddenly, all those jabs, all those jokes, didn't seem so funny anymore. Because this wasn't just a pilot. And it definitely wasn't Grandma Flyboy. This was someone who had just flown something no one else on that base had ever even seen. And the silence? It wasn't awkward. It was respect. Nobody moved. For a full 10 seconds, the crowd just stared, mouths slightly open, eyes blinking slower than usual. It was as if everyone's mind was scrambling to match what they had just seen with what they thought they knew. Eleanor Briggs didn't look like she'd just performed a flight that bent the rules of physics. She looked calm. Still, like the sky had never doubted her, even when the people on the ground had. Trent Lawson's jaw clenched tight. Jamie Rowe's camera was still rolling, But his hands had started to tremble. He wasn't posting this one. Not yet. Not when he didn't understand what he was seeing. Eleanor stopped at the center of the hangar apron and turned to face the crowd. No podium, no stage. Just one woman, standing tall in front of the very people who had once watched her stripped of her wings. "I know some of you are confused," she began, her voice steady but low, "so let me clarify a few things." She reached into a small tactical pouch and pulled out a slim, encrypted tablet. With a few taps, the portable monitors along the hangar wall lit up. At first, just government seals. Then came a rapid stream of redacted reports, flight footage, clearance codes. She let it run. "This aircraft," she said, motioning toward the sleek black jet behind her, "is part of a deep-level program known as Spectre Wing. Experimental, stealth-capable airframes designed for theater operations that don't officially exist." Whispers swept through the squadron like wind in dry grass. Eleanor continued. "I've been lead test pilot on that program for the last 9 years. I've flown over airspace that never makes the map. I've logged more combat-adjacent flight hours in the last 5 years than this entire squadron combined, and I've done it all in silence, because that was the job." She didn't boast. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke the truth, and that truth landed like thunder. General Beverly Sloan stepped forward, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. When she stopped beside Eleanor, there was no need for introductions. She turned to Trent. "Captain Lawson," she said clearly, "effective immediately. You are relieved of command." The words hit harder than any slap. Gasps broke out finally. Trent opened his mouth to object, but no sound came. He looked around, as if expecting someone to vouch for him. No one did. Lieutenant Jamie Rowe suddenly found his phone not so interesting. He looked down, his face drained of color. General Sloan wasn't finished. "Lieutenant Rowe, your conduct will be reviewed by the Ethics Board. You are suspended pending that review." The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with something else. Shame. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted so completely, it was almost hard to believe it had ever been any other way. Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply looked around the hangar and said, "It was never about age. It was never about tradition. It was about distraction. You judged by what was visible, and you forgot to ask what was real." There was no applause. There didn't need to be. Even the pilots who had once laughed at her now stood with their arms at their sides, not from fear, but from the quiet understanding that they had witnessed something sacred. General Sloan placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Some of us knew," she said softly, almost like it was an apology. "But now, they all do." Eleanor turned back toward the crowd. "I didn't come here to prove anything," she said. "I just came to fly. But some lessons have to be taught mid-air." Then she stepped aside, letting the aircraft behind her do the rest of the talking. Sleek, silent, spectral, just like her. Later that day, back inside a quiet conference room with no windows, Trent Lawson sat across from a review board. Gone was the tailored swagger. Gone was the gleam in his smile. What remained was a man exposed. They played footage Jamie Rowe had recorded the moment Eleanor was forced to remove her patches, the moment he had laughed, the moment no one else had spoken up. They questioned Trent about policy, about motivations, about the efficiency reforms that seemed suspiciously targeted. He tried to explain. He tried to blame. But the truth was there, frame by frame, in video and testimony. And Eleanor? She sat quietly in the back. Didn't lean forward, didn't speak unless asked. When she did speak, it was short and direct. Facts only, no commentary. The board deliberated for less than an hour. Abuse of authority. Discrimination under the guise of reform. Conduct unbecoming of command. Trent Lawson was stripped of rank and removed from service. Jamie Rowe was dismissed with reprimands and barred from holding another military media post. When they walked past Eleanor one last time, Trent looked at her not in anger, not in defiance, but with something closer to confusion. "You never fought back," he said. Eleanor met his eyes. "I was never fighting," she replied. "I was waiting." And just like that, he was gone. Not with a roar, but with a silence that no one would forget. In the days that followed, Falcon Ridge Air Force Base felt different. The air was lighter, not in temperature, but in spirit. You could feel it during morning drills when conversations flowed again without tension. You could see it in the way younger pilots lingered a little longer in the hangars, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. The fear that had crept into every hallway under Captain Lawson's command was gone. It hadn't been swept away in fury. It had dissolved in silence, Eleanor's silence. No banners were raised, no emails were sent out, but changes happened, one by one. Mandatory tech proficiency audits were scrapped. Uniform inspections returned to a once-weekly cadence, based on practicality, not optics. And most quietly of all, a new title appeared on the base directory. Senior Advisor, Leadership Development. Cole Eleanor Briggs, Ret. She never asked for it. She never used the office. But the name stayed on the door, even as Eleanor continued walking the flight line like nothing had changed. Her boots still kicked up dust, her sleeves still rolled at the elbow, and her hands still steady as ever. She didn't give lectures. She asked questions. She didn't command rooms. She simply walked in, and people straightened without thinking. One of the first unspoken changes came during simulation training. Instead of isolated drills, Eleanor began introducing team scenario zones that rewarded listening over shouting, calm under pressure, and the kind of intuition you couldn't learn in a manual. And then came the leadership circles. Every Thursday evening, she gathered small groups, rank didn't matter, and let the pilots talk about fear, about ego, about pressure. Some sessions were awkward at first, others ended in tears. But slowly, the culture began to shift. It wasn't about being new or old. It was about being prepared, being aware, being real. One afternoon, long after drills had ended, a young second lieutenant named Rosa Ramirez stayed behind. She stood near Eleanor as she packed up her notes, clearly hesitant. Eleanor didn't look up. "Go ahead," she said gently. Rosa's voice was quiet. "Ma'am, how do you earn respect when you don't look like the ones in charge?" Eleanor paused. Then she smiled. "You believe in yourself first, long before anyone else does." Rosa blinked, as if expecting something longer. But that was all Eleanor said. And somehow, it was enough. That sentence would live in Rosa's journal for years to come, and later years down the line she'd pass it on to others. By the time summer rolled around, the base was ready for its annual air show. Families came early with folding chairs and coolers. Retired veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with wide-eyed schoolchildren. Fighter jets roared overhead in tight formation, leaving ribbons of white across the blue. But everyone stayed for one name. When the announcer called for Colonel Eleanor Briggs, the cheers didn't sound polite, they sounded personal. She taxied the Spectre jet down the runway, its surface shimmering like smoke trapped in glass. Inside the tinted canopy, Eleanor sat calm, composed, her hands guiding technology few would ever touch. The engines growled on deep and smooth and the jet launched skyward. No loops, no theatrics, just power, grace, precision. She climbed, curved, dipped, and rose again. Every movement purposeful, every angle sharp as thought. It was like watching music in motion. People didn't clap during the flight, they just watched. Some with hands over hearts. Some with tears they didn't expect. As she passed low over the runway one last time, a small boy near the front held up a cardboard sign with blocky, uneven letters. "My grandma flies higher." Eleanor didn't see it, but Emily did. Emily, her daughter, stood nearby with her sons, hand on their shoulders. She had never heard her mother talk about medals or missions, but now, seeing her above them all, she understood everything. When the jet landed and came to a soft halt, the crowd didn't erupt. They simply stood. Some saluted. Others placed a hand on their heart. And when Eleanor stepped out, she didn't wave. She just nodded, the way a mountain might bow. Later that afternoon, inside the newly renovated training hangar, a mural was unveiled. It showed Eleanor standing next to the Spectre jet, helmet under one arm, wind in her hair, sky at her back. Beneath the image, etched in brushed steel, "Excellence knows no age." No speeches were made. No flashbulbs popped. The moment didn't need words. It already said everything. Looking back, people would describe Eleanor's story in different ways. Some called it a comeback, others a quiet rebellion. But those who were there, those who saw the whole thing unfold, they knew better. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving herself. It was about reminding the world of something we're too quick to forget. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to boast to be brilliant. And sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that speaks last. Now it's your turn. Have you ever seen someone underestimated only to rise in silence and prove everyone wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what story you want to hear next. And don't forget to subscribe if you believe quiet strength is the loudest truth of all.